What if the poorest person you know is actually the most powerful human being in the room, and the one driving the nicest car is quietly, invisibly, completely owned by someone else? Sit with that question for a second, because I am not asking it as a trick. I am asking it because somewhere in your life right now, there is a version of you who wanted less, and a version of you who was talked into wanting more, and only one of those two people is free. Most of us never stop to check which one is currently in charge. We just keep moving, keep paying, keep performing, keep scrolling past the one thought that could actually change everything. And that thought is this: power is not what you can buy. Power is what you can walk away from without your hands shaking. I want you to think about the last time you said yes to something you did not want to do. Maybe it was a job that drained you a little more every single week. Maybe it was a purchase you could not really afford, but felt like you had earned. Maybe it was staying quiet in a room where you should have spoken, because speaking might have cost you something you were too scared to lose. Now ask yourself honestly, were you saying yes because you wanted to, or because you needed to? Because some invisible obligation had already made the decision for you long before you opened your mouth. That gap, the one between wanting and needing, is where almost every person alive today quietly loses their freedom. And the strange part is that nobody forces this on you directly. There is no single villain, no group of men in a room deciding to trap you. It happens slowly, through 1,000 small agreements you barely noticed you were making. A subscription here, a loan there, a slightly bigger apartment because it looked better to the people who would never actually help you move your furniture. A car that cost more than your savings account has ever held. Each one felt small, each one felt reasonable, and together, they built a cage so comfortable that most people mistake it for a home. Here is the part that should unsettle you a little. This was never really about the objects. The objects are just symptoms. What actually happened is that your sense of who you are slowly got wired into things outside your control. Your identity got outsourced to your job title, your bank balance, your follower count, the brand on your shoes, the opinion of people who would not remember your name in 5 years. And once your identity depends on something outside of you, that something now has leverage over you, whether you admit it or not. There is an old, cold, brutally practical idea that comes from a man most people only know as a symbol of manipulation and cruelty: Niccolò Machiavelli. Strip away the caricature for a moment, the villain in a black cloak whispering schemes, and what is left is something closer to a diagnostician of human behavior. He was not interested in being liked. He was interested in what actually works, in how power really moves between people, stripped of wishful thinking. And buried inside that cold, strategic way of seeing the world is a truth that modern life has almost completely buried under noise. The person who needs the least is the person who cannot be controlled. Think about that sentence again, slowly. The person who needs the least is the person who cannot be controlled. Not the richest person, not the most successful person by whatever metric your feed is currently obsessed with. The one who needs the least. Because control, real control, the kind that governs your Tuesday mornings and your Sunday nights, and the tone of voice you use with your boss, is built entirely out of your needs. Every need is a handle someone else can grab. Every want disguised as a need is another handle, and most of us are walking around covered in handles, wondering why we feel like we are constantly being pulled in directions we never chose. I want to tell you about two people, and I want you to notice which one your gut assumes is doing better in life, because your gut has probably already been trained by the very system we are about to talk about. The first person makes an impressive salary. They drive something German and expensive. Their home has the kind of kitchen people photograph. Their calendar is full, their inbox is fuller, and their coworkers describe them as successful without a second of hesitation. But underneath that surface is a mortgage that eats a frightening percentage of their income, a car payment that renews every few years like clockwork, credit card balances that never quite reach zero, and a job they have quietly hated for over 3 years, but cannot leave, because leaving would mean losing the one thing holding the entire structure together. If you offered this person freedom tomorrow, freedom to quit, freedom to speak honestly to their boss, freedom to walk away from a relationship that has gone cold, they could not take it. Not because they lack courage, because they lack margin. The walls are load-bearing. The second person earns considerably less. Their apartment is smaller, their car is older, their wardrobe is simpler, but they have almost no debt. They have a small, unglamorous emergency fund sitting quietly in an account nobody sees. They have time in the evenings that is genuinely theirs, not borrowed against future stress. And when their manager asked them to compromise something they believed in, they said no, calmly, without panic, because saying no did not threaten their survival. This person has less. This person also has more actual power than almost anyone in that expensive kitchen, because power, real power, is measured by what you can refuse without collapsing. That is the entire argument, and everything else in this video is just going to unpack how deep that idea goes, how it was engineered into you without your permission, and what it would take to quietly take it back. Let's start with the trap itself, because it is worth understanding exactly how it is built, the same way a locksmith studies a lock before deciding whether to trust it. Picture a laboratory experiment, the kind researchers still cite when they talk about desire and manipulation. A group of rats is placed near a small mechanism, a piece of cheese sitting just inside a trap. The rats do not know it is a trap. All they know is that the cheese is there, and other rats are already racing toward it. So they race too. They do not stop to ask why the cheese exists, or who put it there, or what happens after they reach it. They just run, because everyone else is running, and running feels like progress. Now replace the cheese with a house you cannot quite afford, a car slightly nicer than your neighbor's, a vacation posted online before the flight has even landed, a promotion that comes with more hours and more headaches disguised as more status. None of these things are evil by themselves. A house is not evil. A car is not evil. Ambition is not evil. The trap is not the object. The trap is the reason you are chasing it. The moment the goal exists mainly to be seen, to be compared, to prove something to people who were never actually watching that closely in the first place, you have stepped onto the same floor as the rats, sprinting toward cheese wired to a spring. The uncomfortable question is not whether you want nice things. Of course you do. The uncomfortable question is, who is actually deciding what nice means for you? Because most of the time, it is not you. It is advertising that has studied human insecurity for 100 years and gotten terrifyingly good at it. It is social media, engineered by extremely intelligent people whose entire job is to keep your attention just slightly hungry, slightly comparing, slightly convinced that someone else's life is a notch above yours. It is culture, whispering that self-worth and net worth are the same words spelled differently. And here is the part that should genuinely bother you. A person obsessed with appearing successful is remarkably easy to control. Not because they are foolish, but because their desire has become visible, predictable, and exploitable. If a company knows you want to look accomplished, they can sell you the appearance of accomplishment for a monthly payment. If an employer knows you are financially stretched, they know exactly how far they can push you before you push back, because they know you cannot afford to walk out that door. Desire, when it becomes obvious and desperate, is the easiest lever in the world to pull. Detachment, on the other hand, is nearly impossible to manipulate, because there is nothing left to grab onto. This is where debt enters the story, and I want to be precise here, because debt itself is not automatically a villain. Some debt is a tool, used with intention, understood fully, paid on a plan. That is not what we are talking about. We are talking about the other kind, the impulsive kind, the kind that quietly mortgages a future you have not even met yet, in exchange for a present moment that will be forgotten within a week. Every dollar of unnecessary debt is a small, signed agreement to keep doing whatever it takes to pay it back, even when what it takes is exhausting, degrading, or slowly hollowing you out. Debt does not just cost you interest, it costs you options. It costs you the ability to say no to a toxic boss, because you need this paycheck more than you need your dignity this month. It costs you the ability to leave a relationship that has gone quietly rotten, because untangling your finances feels more terrifying than staying. It costs you the version of yourself who could have taken a real risk on something meaningful, because risk requires slack, and slack is exactly what debt removes. I am not telling you this to shame anyone. Almost everyone alive today has been sold debt as a normal, even responsible, part of adulthood. But normal is not the same as harmless. And there is something almost sinister about how naturally we accept monthly payments stretching years into the future for things we will barely remember owning. Ask yourself honestly, can you list, right now, everything you are currently making payments on? If the answer takes you longer than a few seconds, that alone tells you something about how much of your future has quietly been claimed by decisions your past self made in a hurry. Reducing debt, cutting the unnecessary agreements, is not retreat. It does not mean giving up, shrinking your ambitions, or accepting a smaller life out of fear. It means recovering leverage. It means being able to look at a bad situation and calmly say, I do not need this, instead of silently thinking, I cannot afford to leave. That single shift, from I cannot afford to leave to I do not need this, is one of the most powerful transformations a person can go through, and almost nobody talks about it, because it does not sell anything. Now let's talk about a different kind of accumulation, one that never shows up on a credit card statement, but drains something arguably more valuable than money: attention. We tend to think of ourselves as people who occasionally get distracted. That framing is generous, and honestly, a little outdated. The more accurate picture is that most of us are living inside an environment engineered, with extraordinary precision, to fracture our attention into smaller and smaller pieces, because fractured attention is profitable. Every notification, every autoplay, every red dot on an app icon exists because someone, somewhere, ran the numbers and discovered that interrupting you increases engagement. Your focus is not being accidentally scattered, it is being deliberately mined. Think about how many tabs are open in your mind right now, not on your browser, in your actual mind. A message you have not replied to, a headline you skimmed but never finished, an argument from 3 days ago that still occasionally flares up when you are trying to fall asleep, a comparison you made to someone online that left a small, quiet bruise you have not acknowledged. None of these individually feels like a big deal. Together, they form a low, constant hum of noise that makes deep thought almost impossible, because deep thought requires something increasingly rare: an uninterrupted mind. Here is something worth sitting with. A cluttered mind does not just feel unpleasant. It actively prevents you from making good decisions, because good decisions require the ability to sit with uncertainty long enough to actually think something through, instead of reacting to the loudest signal in the room. When your attention is constantly being pulled, you stop responding to your life. You start reacting to it. And reacting is exactly the state that keeps you easiest to steer, because reaction happens too fast for reflection to catch up. Protecting your attention, then, is not some soft self-care platitude. It is closer to a survival strategy. If your focus is scattered, someone else will happily use it. Whether that someone is an app designed to keep you scrolling, a workplace culture that treats constant availability as loyalty, or a social circle that has quietly trained you to always be reachable, always be responsive, always be one notification away from dropping whatever actually mattered to answer whatever just lit up. Now let's go somewhere slightly more personal, because everything we have talked about so far, the objects, the debt, the noise, all of it eventually funnels into one place: identity. Here is a question that is uncomfortable enough that most people avoid asking it directly. If you lost your job tomorrow, would you still know who you are? If your relationship ended without warning, would something in you still feel solid? If your online presence disappeared overnight, every post, every follower, every carefully curated version of your life, would there be a person left standing underneath it, or would there just be silence? For a lot of people, and I want to say this gently, because I include myself in this, the honest answer is unsettling. Somewhere along the way, without ever deciding to, we let our sense of self get built on top of things that were never guaranteed to stay. A job can disappear in a single meeting. A relationship can end in a single conversation. A platform can change its algorithm and quietly erase years of an audience you thought was yours. If any of those events would leave you feeling like you had lost yourself, not just lost something, but lost yourself, then your identity has been built on a foundation that was never designed to hold weight. This is precisely why people cling so tightly to appearances, to status, to the version of success that can be photographed. It is not vanity in the shallow sense people usually mean when they use that word. It is closer to fear. If your worth depends entirely on external proof, you will defend that proof at almost any cost, because losing it does not just feel like losing an achievement, it feels like losing yourself. The alternative is not easy, and I am not going to pretend it is some simple mindset trick you can adopt by tomorrow morning. But it is available to anyone willing to do the work. It means slowly, deliberately, shifting the foundation of your identity onto things that cannot be taken from you in a single afternoon. Your discipline, your ability to learn something difficult and stick with it. Your capacity to think clearly when everyone around you is panicking. Your willingness to keep a promise you made to yourself when nobody is watching to confirm it. Your ability to love someone honestly without needing them to complete you. These things are slower to build and far less visible, and infinitely more stable than anything you can buy, wear, or post. Now, I want to be very clear about something, because this next part is often misunderstood, and misunderstanding it defeats the entire point. None of what we are talking about is an argument for poverty, or for rejecting comfort, or for pretending ambition is some kind of moral failure. That would be its own trap, just wearing a different disguise. The trap of performing simplicity the same way other people perform wealth. There is nothing noble about suffering for its own sake, and there is nothing wrong with wanting a beautiful home, a reliable car, meaningful travel, or financial success earned through real work you care about. The distinction that actually matters is not between having and not having. It is between choosing and needing. A person can own an expensive home and still be free, if that home was chosen deliberately, paid for without desperation, and could be sold tomorrow without shattering their sense of self. Another person can own almost nothing and still be trapped, if their minimalism is really just fear of commitment wearing a calmer outfit. What matters is not the size of your life. What matters is whether you could shrink it, or expand it, or completely rearrange it, without your identity collapsing in the process. So what does this actually look like, in practice? Not as a philosophy, but as a Tuesday afternoon. It starts with something I would call a brutal inventory. And I use the word brutal on purpose, because gentle self-reflection tends to let you off the hook, and this particular exercise only works if you are honest with yourself in a way that occasionally stings. Look at your possessions first. Not with judgment, just with clear eyes. How many of the things you own were bought because you genuinely wanted them, versus bought because you were trying to prove something to someone about something? You do not need to throw everything away in some dramatic purge. You just need to notice the difference, because noticing is where the actual power begins. Then look at your money. Not just the number in your account, but the shape of it. What percentage of your income is already claimed before you even receive it? By debts, subscriptions, obligations you agreed to in a different season of your life and never revisited. This is not about becoming obsessed with frugality. It is about understanding exactly how much of your future is currently owned by decisions your past self made without consulting you. Then look at your time. Where does it actually go? Not where you assume it goes, but where it genuinely disappears to. Most people are shocked when they track this honestly for even a single week. The gap between how we imagine we spend our hours and how we actually spend them is often enormous, and that gap is usually filled with exactly the kind of low-value noise we talked about earlier. And finally, look at your relationships, because this is the one people avoid the longest. Which connections in your life genuinely add something? Energy, honesty, growth, warmth, and which ones quietly drain you every single time you interact, leaving you a little smaller than you were before? This is not about cutting people off dramatically. It is about being honest, at least with yourself, about which relationships are actually mutual, and which ones you are only maintaining out of habit or guilt. Once you have done this inventory, and I mean actually done it, not just nodded along while listening to this, the next step becomes strangely obvious. You start removing what weakens your position and protecting what strengthens it. You cancel the subscription you forgot you had. You have the uncomfortable conversation you have been avoiding. You cut the expense that exists, purely to impress people who, if we are honest, are far too busy worrying about their own image to spend much time thinking about yours. You start putting a little money aside, not because you are chasing some fantasy of extreme wealth, but because a small cushion of savings is one of the most quietly powerful things a person can own. It is the thing that lets you say no. It is the thing that turns "I have to" back into "I choose to." I also want to say something that often gets left out of conversations like this, because people tend to swing too far toward austerity and end up building a new kind of prison, just a smaller and colder one. Keep something. Keep at least one indulgence, chosen deliberately, that brings you real joy, whether that is a particular coffee, a piece of art, a trip you save for months to take. Simplicity that feels like punishment does not last, because nothing sustainable is built entirely out of denial. The goal was never to feel poor. The goal is to feel free, and freedom occasionally includes a little bit of beautifully chosen excess, as long as you chose it, instead of it choosing you. Let's return for a moment to that cold, strategic lens we borrowed earlier, because there is one more piece of it worth understanding. A skilled strategist does not walk into a negotiation needing to win. The moment you need something from the other side of the table, you have already handed them leverage, whether they use it or not. The strongest position in any negotiation, in any relationship, in any job, in any conversation, belongs to the person who could walk away and be completely fine. Not because they do not care, because their well-being was never staked on the outcome in the first place. This applies far beyond boardrooms. It applies to the conversation with your manager about a raise you deserve. It applies to the conversation with a partner about something that has been bothering you for months. It applies to the moment you consider whether to stay quiet or say the honest thing. Every time you desperately need the outcome to go a certain way, your voice shrinks. Your posture shrinks. Your options shrink. Every time you have built enough margin, financial, emotional, and otherwise, that you could survive the outcome going badly, something remarkable happens. You speak more clearly. You negotiate more calmly. People, whether they can articulate why or not, sense the difference, and they tend to respect it. This is the actual mechanism behind the idea that simplicity is a form of power. It is not that having less makes you virtuous. It is that needing less makes you unshakable. And an unshakable person moves through the world differently than a desperate one, even if, from the outside, their bank accounts look nearly identical. I want to bring this back to something personal for a moment, because ideas like this can start to feel abstract if we stay too far above the ground for too long. Think about the heaviest period of stress you have ever experienced. Chances are, if you trace it back far enough, it was not really about the surface-level problem. It was about the feeling of having no other option. A job you hated but could not leave. A relationship that had gone cold but felt too tangled to untangle. A financial situation so tight that even a single unexpected expense felt like a crisis. In almost every case, what made the situation unbearable was not the situation itself, but the absence of an exit. And what creates an exit, more often than we like to admit, is exactly the kind of quiet, unglamorous preparation we have been talking about this entire video. Savings. Fewer obligations. A mind less cluttered with noise. A sense of self that does not collapse the moment external circumstances shift. None of this happens overnight, and I want to be honest with you about that, because promising instant transformation would be its own small betrayal. This is not a video that ends with you suddenly free tomorrow morning. It is closer to a map, one you have to walk yourself. One slow, deliberate decision at a time. Cancel the subscription. Have the honest conversation. Put a little money aside, even if it feels laughably small at first. Notice the difference between what you actually want and what you were trained to want. Protect your attention like it is the scarce, valuable resource it actually is, because it is. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles into a person once they stop needing so much from the world. Not the quiet of giving up, but the quiet of no longer being at the mercy of every small fluctuation around them. Prices rise, and it barely registers. because their life was never built on razor-thin margins. A friend disappoints them, and it stings, but it does not shatter them, because their sense of worth was never fully outsourced to that friendship. An opportunity falls through, and they are disappointed, genuinely, but not destroyed, because they were never desperate for it in the first place. That quiet is not something you are born with. It is something you build, decision by decision, refusal by refusal, boundary by boundary. I know some of what I have said today probably sounds harsh in places, especially the parts about desire being exploited and appearances being a kind of trap. I am not saying this to make you feel guilty about wanting nice things, or successful things, or beautiful things. I am saying it because somewhere underneath the noise of modern life, there is a quieter, steadier version of you, one who is not constantly comparing, constantly performing, constantly one purchase or one promotion away from finally feeling like enough. That version of you is not weaker for wanting less. That version of you is, strangely, the most powerful version that exists, because that version cannot be bought, cannot be pressured, and cannot be controlled through the usual levers that work so effectively on everyone else. So here is where I want to leave you, and I want you to actually sit with this instead of letting it slide past you the way most things do. Power is not what you can acquire. Power is what you can release without falling apart. The people who seem to have everything are sometimes the ones with the least room to move, trapped by the very things they worked so hard to obtain. And the people who seem to have very little are sometimes standing in the most stable position in the entire room, simply because nothing critical to their sense of self depends on staying there. You do not need to overhaul your entire life this week. You do not need to sell your possessions or quit your job tomorrow morning. What you need to do is smaller, and honestly, a little more demanding, because it asks for honesty instead of drama. Look at one area of your life, just one. Your spending, your time, your relationships, your attention, and ask yourself a single question. Is this strengthening my position, or is it quietly making me easier to control? You already know the answer. Most people do, the moment they actually ask the question instead of avoiding it. The only thing left is deciding what you are going to do about it. Starting today. Starting with something small enough to actually finish. Because that is how every real transformation begins. Not with a single dramatic leap, but with one honest decision, followed by another, until one day you look around at your own life and realize you are no longer running toward the cheese. You are the one standing outside the trap, watching everyone else run, finally, quietly, undeniably free. Before we go further, I want to tell you about a moment that, for me, made all of this stop being theory and start being real. A few years ago, I sat across from someone who, on paper, had everything. A title that impressed people at dinner parties, a car that turned heads in a parking lot, a calendar so full it looked like proof of importance. And yet, over the course of a single conversation, this person quietly admitted something that stuck with me far longer than anything on their resume. They said, almost in passing, that they had not made a single decision in 3 years without first calculating what they could afford to lose. Not what they wanted, not what felt right, what they could afford, financially, socially, reputationally, to lose. Every choice ran through that filter first, and somewhere underneath the expensive suit and the impressive title, I realized I was looking at someone who had almost no freedom left at all, dressed in every visible symbol of freedom our culture knows how to manufacture. If you made it to the end of this video, comment, "I'm here," and I'll personally reply. And if it resonated with you, subscribe to become a part of it, and like it if you enjoyed it.